Well, have you ever walked away from time with a friend and felt completely drained, like the life got sucked right out of you? Well, maybe they one-upped every story you shared. Maybe the whole visit became a therapy session, and unfortunately, you were the therapist. Or maybe they just made everything about them again. And here's the hard part. At our stage of life, when our friend circles are already shrinking, we feel guilty even noticing it, complaining about it. But today we're going to talk honestly about vampire friends, who they are, why they drain us, and what we can actually do when we care about someone, but they're just exhausting us. Well, hi, I'm Laura, and I'm so glad to have you back here on the channel. Today we're talking about vampires, and no, not those Transylvania vampires, but those people in our lives. Maybe they used to be in our lives, maybe we're dealing with people like them right now who suck the oxygen out of every get together, every phone call, every interaction. You know, we sometimes call them the Debbie Downers or the one-uppers or constant complainers. You know, the gals that say, well, let me tell you why my story is bigger than yours, without actually saying that. But if you have someone in your life who makes you feel maybe a little stressed, a little tense, overly cautious with what topics you bring up when you're together, you may have a vampire in your life. And it's funny, they can be a longtime friend, the neighbor next door, a work colleague, even a family member. And if you think about it, maybe they've always been a little this way, or maybe life has changed them. Often our friends change because, and we change too, because of a loss, an illness, a big disappointment, or major life transition. A setback may have turned someone you care about into a walking emotional vacuum. They just suck the fun out of every interaction. It's so darn frustrating when we're just trying to spend time with someone we used to enjoy, someone we have a history with, someone we care about. We just wish things could go back to the way that they were. So today we're going to talk about what these friendships look like, how they affect us so we can recognize them, and especially at this stage of life, most importantly, what can we do? What can we realistically do about it? So number one, how do you spot a vampire? Well, a vampire friend is someone who, as I said, drains you every time you spend time together. You know the signs. You go to lunch feeling in a good mood, you're excited to get out, and you leave feeling like you've run a marathon. You share something happy, they immediately top it, usually with something tragic, something crazy. Well, you won't believe the horrible week I've had, or you can't imagine what I've been going through and how much bad luck I've had, and me, me, me. It's all about what happened to them. And I'm talking about someone with a pattern, not a friend who calls and is going through a bad time and needs to talk. That's something completely different. With the vampire, you start the conversation with a lighthearted catch up like we all do, right? Hey, hi, what have you been up to? How's it been going? And somehow you ask that one question that allows them to hijack the entire conversation, and you spend your time listening to their issues. No dialogue, just listening. The vampire constantly needs reassurance, attention, or validation, and you feel like You're just there for them to cry on your shoulder, or worse, to be their therapist trying to solve all their problems. And I often speak about people here on the channel who won't let it go until you tell them what they want to hear. And honestly, it's so exhausting trying to figure out what you should say, because just little niceties like, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, wow. That doesn't work. It's frustrating when you try to be kind, but they hear it as you aren't getting their point. So they go through it again with more emphasis or louder. Or they may even say, oh, this is pointless. You just don't understand what I'm going through, because their hurt has to be deeper, their situation more complicated. And I've said this before, probably many times. I really don't think they want our advice. They want to share their hurt, but that's hard on the other person. It does help to remember that it is all about them. And of course, there's a difference between someone who's constantly needy and someone who occasionally needs the help of a friend. We would all hope that we would have friendships that are give and take, but a vampire is very clear about what their needs are. They tend to be predictable because they make everything about them, their problems, their crisis, their victories. Now, there's one vampire, and I've come into contact with a few of them. I call them the bougie vampire. You know, maybe at this age when we have less to talk about, they want to one up everything you've done. If you went to a lovely dinner, well, they went to a nicer one at a fancier restaurant. If you got a new scarf, they bought a more expensive one, or even it was gifted to them. Everything costs more or is better or nicer. And it seems to be part of their self-worth. But what they don't choose to acknowledge is that by one-upping you all the time, aren't they, in effect, telling us that they think they're better than us, or we just can't keep up with them? It's all about being in their own feels, right? All they care about is what they're feeling. The more they talk about themselves, the happier they are, because you're exhausted and they're just, oh, this was lovely. I had a wonderful time. And the tricky thing is that sometimes you've known these vampires for a really long time. Maybe you worked with them for 20 years or lived next door for a decade. Or it could be a relative, which is especially difficult this time of year when we tend to be getting together more often. So we often tolerate the dynamic and we suffer in silence because we have a history with that person. And it's tough to give people up. So number 2, why does this hit so hard once we hit 60, 70, really anytime after 50, 80, 90? Because when we're younger, our friend circles are bigger. They're looser and they're more acquaintances. They're different. But there's always new people coming in and out of our lives. The moms from school, coworkers, neighbors, activity groups, exercise classes, people you run into in the grocery store. If someone drains us, we naturally get to take them in smaller doses. We don't stop and chat. We just wave hello. We don't talk on the phone. We just text. And if there is not a lot of interest, we let things drift apart. But even with family, you know, as we left our homes, we grew up, we started our own lives, it became easier to put distance between us. Keep the phone calls shorter, the visits shorter, because we were making our own lives and we had our own priorities. But as we get older, the friend group is shrinking. Can't stop it. People move away, people get busy with grandchildren, their families pull them in different directions. Sometimes they just simply fade out. Sometimes they suffer debilitating illnesses, maybe an injury. Some, unfortunately, pass away. So we feel a little need to hang on to the ones that are left, even if they've become difficult, because isolation is a real thing. And, I've been thinking about it more and more. And the fact is, there aren't a lot of replacements out there. Unless I move, and what do I want my social life to be like? And what am I willing to tolerate in smaller doses so that I continue to have people in my life? It's different for each one of us. Some of us have more choices than others. It can be affected by our health, by our finances, by our family obligations, and even where we live. If you live in a city, or if you live in a rural area, or if you're in a retirement community, are there opportunities for you to socialize or even volunteer, or do you need to create your own social life versus just being willing to show up and participate? We've all got different levels of ability and opportunity. And there's something else. After 50, our emotional capacity shifts, and many of us are sandwiching, right? We're dealing with aging parents, adult children, maybe grandchildren, health changes, marriage changes, retirement, grief, all different kinds of transitions. And so we're already carrying more than we used to. So when someone drains us now, it hits deeper, it lingers longer, it can even make us feel physically unwell. And that's not being dramatic. That's just the reality for this stage of life. Because energy at this age isn't infinite. So number 3, when a friend changes, what happens when you become their lifeline? This can be really hard, because sometimes the friend wasn't always like this. Maybe they were there for you and you feel an obligation, but maybe now their spouse has passed away. Maybe their children have grown distant or even moved far away. Maybe they're dealing with financial or health fears. Maybe retirement left them without purpose. Maybe they're just lonely in a way that's very painful to admit. And so suddenly you become the safe spot where they unload everything. And you may be all that they have when it comes to friendship, someone to talk to. But unfortunately, sometimes this isn't reciprocal in a healthy way. It's more like you've become their therapist, their emotional dumping ground, their constant reassurance provider. They seem to always take over the conversations. They dominate gatherings by interrupting others, always trying to shift the attention, the spotlight on to them. If someone shares something good, they have something better. They just seem to position themselves so the spotlight is always on them. And because you care about them, or maybe you've cared about them for years, you let it go until you notice that after every interaction, you're exhausted and you're glad it's over. Being empathetic does not make us responsible for understanding everything that someone else is going through to the point of being constantly drained. But number 4, why do we feel stuck? I've shared with you that I've written 2 books about women and our relationships with each other. And as I speak to women around the country, many women tell me, I just can't cut her off. We've been friends for decades. She doesn't have anyone else. She's going through so much. I feel guilty even thinking about pulling back. These reasons are real. They're painful. They're powerful. They're emotional. But here's the reality. Okay. You are allowed to protect yourself, to protect your peace. Only you know what you can handle. You are allowed to choose where your energy goes, and you're allowed to have healthy boundaries at any age. And you would respect that in another woman. But feeling stuck shouldn't mean being trapped. And there's the confusion. It just means that you haven't learned the new tools for this stage of friendship. So what are those tools, and how can you teach an old dog new tricks? Well, it's important. First, ask yourself, number 5, can the friendship be saved? Not every vampire friendship has to end. Some can be adjusted, rebalanced, and brought back to something that feels good again. Maybe not perfect, but comfortable. So let me give you some strategies, and they're gentle strategies because we don't want drama. We don't want breakup. We don't want argument. Boy, talk about sapping your energy. Number 1, shrink the time that you interact. So instead of a 2-hour lunch, meet for 45 minutes. Pick a sandwich spot versus that favorite full lunch restaurant you've been going to, because shorter doses equal less draining. Number 2, add a third person. When you include someone else, the spotlight gets shared. It becomes less intense and less focused on any one person. And for you, you can bounce questions. If she answers a question, hey, Mary, how about you? Blah, blah, and bounce back and forth. Number 3, change the environment. Boy, a simple thing like going for a walk instead of sitting at the kitchen table and having coffee, because movement naturally limits those negative spirals. You're not cornered. Next, set emotional boundaries silently. Not every issue is yours to solve. You can listen without absorbing. You can just listen and be quiet. A simple mental boundary that I tell myself when someone starts droning is, this is her emotion. It's not mine to carry. I'm just here to listen. Next, reinforce positive actions, right? If they don't dominate the conversation, praise it. But people repeat what gets acknowledged. You tell them how much you appreciated them listening to you today. Or thank you so much for asking questions. That really means a lot to me. I really appreciate you taking the time to hear my side of the story. No dramatic confrontations needed, just small tweaks that protect your energy while keeping the bond that you don't want to lose. And number 6, what do you do when you need space? How do you get space without drama? Well, sometimes the balance in the relationship just can't be restored, at least not right away, or maybe it's going to take a long time. That usually happens with families. And we've all heard that saying, old and cranky. And yep, that happens sometimes. It happens to us, and it happens to our parents, and it happens to our friends. So how do you create space without drama, without blowing up? Number 1, take a little longer to respond. We're not talking about being passive aggressive, just not always instantly available. Number 2, be less open with your personal life. If they're driving you crazy, droning on about their personal life all the time, don't feed it by talking about yours. Less fuel leaves them less oxygen to sap out. Move conversations to text, from the phone to text. It naturally limits the intensity. And like I said, put a little bit of time in between responses. And finally, make sure you have some preset hard stops. And you can fib. Hey, I can only, talk for 30 minutes. I've got something scheduled at 3:00. I've got an appointment this afternoon. You can be vague. You can be fibbing. But it sets a boundary, and lead with that so they don't feel like you're cutting them off because of something they said. If you get together weekly, maybe move it to monthly or twice a month. Take those hour-long conversations down to 15 minutes, or move those calls to text whenever possible. Now, space isn't punishment, it's oxygen. It's what allows you to tolerate the smaller doses of the relationship without resentment. Because if you start to resent and get angry and disappointed, then you don't want to be around them. You can't make yourself be around them. Also, make sure that you don't feel guilty. And let me say this very clearly. You are not responsible. I am not responsible for fixing someone else's loneliness. You're not responsible for filling the gaps their children or their spouse left behind. You are not responsible for being anyone's emotional dumping ground. You get to limit how much you have to take, and you are absolutely allowed to protect your mental and your physical well-being. At our age, friendship should be supportive. It should feel supportive, meaningful, uplifting, and not obligatory and draining. So I would close with this. There's hope. Some vampire friends truly don't realize what they're doing. When you take those steps to shift the dynamic, many will adjust naturally because they still value. They want to spend time with you. Others will drift on to someone who can give them the constant focus they need. And that's okay too. If they don't want to change, okay. But the goal isn't to cut friends out of our lives. It's to preserve our energy, keep the friendships that fill us up, that truly bring value to our lives, and maybe do a little retraining if possible. You kind of get what you give what you get sometimes. But we all deserve friendships that leave us feeling lighter, not depleted, more connected, more supported, not drained, not overshadowed. And if you're dealing with a vampire right now, you're not alone. So let me know, are you dealing with a vampire? Let me know if you have someone in your life who's a vampire, or you've gone through it or are going through it now. I look forward to all of your comments, and I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.